we have a great 3 set of papers today. I'm Aaron Sojourner from the University of Minnesota. I'm chairing, and we have 3 papers. We're just going to have the speakers go for 25 minutes. Discussant will go for 5 minutes, and then we'll have 5 or 10 minutes for general discussion. And audience members, please just raise your hand or just jump in. There's not so many of us that we're going to step on each other. Feel free to use the chats too. If you have questions, you can just post them there, and then discussants and presenters can we'll check those and make sure they get answered in the discussion period. And then we'll just repeat that 3 times and have good chance and feedback. And of course, you can always follow up with people afterwards. So our first presenter is Wunnava. He's the David K. Smith 1942 Chair of Applied Economics at Middlebury College in Vermont. He's a research fellow at IZA in Bonn and a fellow at the Global Labor Organization. He's presenting recent longitudinal evidence of size and union threat effects by gender on wages and benefits. And then the discussant will be Alex Herzog-Stein, who's the director of Macroeconomic Policy Institute at the Hans-Boeckler-Foundation, which studies co-determination and research linked to the world of work, and supports research and students on behalf of the German Trade Union Confederation. And his own work focuses a lot on productivity and labor. So without further ado, Fani, take it away.
Oh, okay, thanks, Ben. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
All right, greetings, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Let me see whether I can start from my current slide. Okay. As you can see, the evidence is recent longitudinal evidence of size and union threat effects by gender on wages and benefits. And I'm so delighted to present my work in this particular panel. So just to give, what I'm going to do is I wanted to make sure that since it's first thing in the morning, I wanted to give you a big overview quickly, and then I'll go in much more detail. So what exactly what I'm trying to establish here is that there's a very well-documented firm or establishment size effect, i.e. that means that when you're looking at firms, as the firms get larger or bigger, then there's a higher probability that, they will pay, not only pay higher wages, but there's also a higher probability of them receiving, higher probability of receiving benefits, okay? So if that's the case, that's the big point. So now, so further, the firm and establishment size wage effects are larger for men than for women. So there is some gender effect there to look into. Then union wage effect decreases with the establishment size for both genders. So the story here is, this is what we call classic union threat effect argument. And this becomes much more critical anytime there's a tight labor market. I.e. what happens is, if unions wages are relatively higher than non-union wages, then what happens is, if there's especially as the firm size increases, there's a threat that non-union firms might also become unionized. You know that recently what happened when you look at Amazon, other places where they really wanted to go out and unionize because they felt like they're getting shortchanged. So what would the employers do? If I'm a non-union employer, I would try my best not to get the unions in my workshop. Maybe one way we do that is by paying you better benefits, better wages, flex time, whatever may be the case. And case in point, it really did happen at Middlebury College because what happened is there was this little shortage of some budget deficit. It's not like Middlebury was short of cash. He hired a president for 1 year. He came, he wanted to cut everything. So what he did is he went out and he fired about 50 staff members. And all of a sudden, I don't know what you heard about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders used to be our mayor of Burlington. Now, of course, he's a senator. So he was a very big union guy. All of a sudden, big unions came up to the Middlebury College. You won't even believe. So what was the effect? All of a sudden, those part-time employees, whatever, those people who were getting very meager wages, and all of a sudden, the college paid much more attention. In other words, they were given flex time. They can contribute to retirement, so forth and so on. So I've seen with my own eyes that even in a place like Middlebury College, which is not a corporation, but we did see the threat of unions coming in, that usually the compensation gets upgraded. So then the other thing which we saw is that union wage premium is higher for males across firm sizes relative to females. So in other words, the unions in large establishment may have a role to play in narrowing that gender wage gap. In other words, if they can recruit more women, and then if there is this firm size effect, maybe that can help us. So then one more final point here is on the policy front, given the presence of noticeable gender differences in estimated effects and benefits. So when I look at the benefits, I'm going to be looking at those 4 benefits: health insurance, maternity leave or paternity leave, life insurance, and retirement. Then I'd say that the unions can't have one kind of a treatment. They should make sure that to pay attention to which genders pay attention to which kind of benefits. And so just to give you a little bit of a roadmap, how I would like to present my work is I wanted to give you a little bit of a stylized facts or insights from the literature. So I'm going to say a little bit about the firm size effect, and then I'm going to say a little bit about the union threat effect literature, and then trying to put things together, the union effect on wages and fringe benefits, and then give you a little bit of an idea about my methodology and data, and then some empirical work, hopefully some conclusions. So this is exactly what I have as far as my plan is concerned. So first thing is, rather than boring you with a lot of literature, I wanted to tell a little bit about stylized facts. In other words, this is the data, is the national data, employer cost per hour for employee compensation, and then cost as a percentage of total compensation. So here we are looking at the private industry workers by establishment size, and this data is relatively very recent, 2021. So I got this from the BLS website, as you can see. So if you go back, so when I'm talking about the firm size, usually this is a classic way they usually look at the firm size, like 1 to 99, 100 to 499, and then 500 workers. So now when you go back and when you look at the total compensation, look at the total compensation. When you look at the as a hourly compensation, it's about $31 when you look at like workers from 1 to 99. Whereas when you look at here, 100 to 499, it's about 38.06. So that means you do see almost about $7 increase. Then when you go back and when you look at 500 plus workers, it's about $54. As you can see, almost about $18 or $19 more. So what is one thing I wanted to show you is the total compensation per hour is increasing as you move from one firm size to the next one. Then I wanted to go out and see what is the relative composition of wages and salaries. And so when you go back and when you look at here, so in terms of your wages and salaries, in this particular case, this is about 23.12. So I can see that's about 75%. It's about 70% here, and then 60% here. So what is one thing you see if you go back and if you look at these numbers, not only the wages are increasing, but also even the total benefits are also increasing. That's okay. But the most important thing is, as you can see, one of the things I want you to take from here is total benefits as part of compensation is increasing as you move from small firms to the next firm. So if that's the case, I wanted to give you, not bore you with a lot of literature, but there's a lot of work done in this particular area. So you go back to Leicester, 1967, and Stanley Masters, he was my professor when I was in grad school, 69. Mello, Dunn, Brown, and Madoff, their classic article, Evans. I mean, what I'm saying, the reason why I put ... is there's so much work which is published over years, which does document there's a clear-cut firm size effect. So what you might say, well, what is the reason? I mean, there are a lot of factors come into play. Maybe when you look at the firm size effects, maybe it could be a good argument for efficiency wage. In other words, no shirking, you know what I mean? So maybe you're hiring high-skilled workers. I mean, so a lot of factors come into play when it comes to the firm size. So then the next one I wanted to show you a little bit is about the union threat effect. So here I wanted to say a little bit about the literature here, and then go back and show you some of the recent work, recent numbers here. So when you look at the union threat effect, the first one, which really started out with Podgorski, I think he just recently retired from Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken. So, and this is one of my own papers when I was just starting out. Bellman, and then Wunnava and Ewan, and his partner in crime at Texas Tech University, then Hank Farber. So all these, what exactly all these things really tell us is that anytime there's any threat that unions might be getting into the workshop or whatever, unions might target them. The reason is, as the firm size increases, it's economies of scale for unions. It is much more easy for them to organize at a large establishment than at a small establishment. So in that way, the economies, so their unions try to get into larger firms than the smaller firms. So the flip side of that that means that if the unions do get into smaller firms, usually you do see that the benefits are, the wage or benefit gap between small firms and union firms and non-union firms is going to be much larger, as you can see. So when you look at the union effects on wages, first thing is I wanted to say a little bit about the wages, because there's quite a bit of work on wages and very little bit of work on benefits. So that's why when you look at the wages, I don't want to go out and bore you with how much is documented, but I wanted to say a few things about it. So in general, when you go back and when you look at the fringe benefits, it has been documented that union worker benefit packages are generous in general. So what are some of the studies? We have Montgomery and Shaw, Wunnava, like 1999, which I already cited upstairs. And then also Buchmuller et al. So all these studies indicate to you that as the unions seem to have a much better compensation package. So what I want to do is, again, I want to give you a snapshot from a BLS data set, BLS website. So if you go back and if you look at here, so I'm going to show you two different industries, goods producing industries, and sorry, you know what, I'm sorry that when I was too late typing this thing, it should be service producing. This is not goods, I'm sorry, folks. And then I realized that only after I pasted it, and I didn't want to mess around with it, but I just wanted to tell you. So that's the reason it should be footnote 1 and footnote 2. You can see that in my paper. So what exactly this is showing us? This is showing you the private industry by major industry group and establishment size and bargaining status. And then we are looking, when you go back and when you look at here, look at the goods producing industries. Compensation wise, so this is the overall number, like $41, as you can see, wages and salaries about 28. So these are the percentages. Now let's go out and see, this is the weighted average of all the different firm sizes. Now let's go back and look at each of them. So what is one thing you can see here is across the board, as the firm size increases, as the compensation is increasing, as you can see. Then similarly, when you go look at the wages, it's also increasing. Then also the benefits are also increasing. So then what I did is I went out and I said, well, how about we look at the goods producing industries and then look at the union members and non-union members. Of course, this is not my data, this is BLS data. As you can see that these are the numbers we see, like $54, $31, and $23 for as far as the unions are concerned. So now when you look at the non-union wages, you do see that these are the non-union wages. Across the board, you do see that non-union wages are lower. So in other words, one thing, without controlling for any differences, whatever, in general, the union wages are higher than non-union wages. So now let's look at the service producing industries. The same storyline here, of course, definitely we know that. So what happened is here, the entries are somewhat missing, but it's there in the paper. I'm sorry that when I did the cutting and pasting, I missed out on it. But anyway, in general, when you go back and see, so this number here, you're going to see is going to be a bit smaller than these numbers. So now when you go back and the same storyline here, if you go back and if you look, now one thing you can see, union workers in goods producing are getting a little bit higher wages than non-union workers, like union workers in service producing, and the same thing here. So what is the storyline here? That means there is a union wage premium, and also benefits-wise, unions are a little bit more generous across all these firm sizes. Okay. So where do I wanted to take you now? So since I showed you a little bit on that, what I want to do is I wanted to combine two things here with my methodology. So one thing, Aaron, when you have about 2 or 3 minutes, please alert me so that okay, thanks. So when you go back and when you're looking at it, what I'm going to do is, maybe I send the paper. I hope that you folks get a chance to read the paper. So methodology and data, the reason why I'm just going to put out my model first is just to put things in perspective for you, is I'm going to be using NLSY data. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the data down the road. So I'm running 2 specifications. One is I'm looking at the log wage, and then you might say, what is this PI business? This is here where I'm looking at whether employer is providing a particular benefit to you. So I'm running two different regressions. So then when you go back and when you look at here, what I did is the way in which I tried to come up with my specification, because I wanted to tease out So when you go back and when you look at the size 2 or size 3, I'll show you in just a minute what size 2, size 3 means. That means in my data, I was able to find out exactly where my workers are coming from, whether they belong to size 2 or size 3. Size 3 is bigger than size 2. Then when you go back and when you see, I'll show you in just a minute how I got these interactions in a sec. But when you go back and when you look at the U1, before I talk about these things, let me talk about U1, U2, and U3. This means if you're a union member from the smaller size firm, or this is a union member from a second size firm, or this is for the large firm. So then what I did is I also have what do you call it, gender. So what I did is I interacted the gender variable. So to tease out, so what I did is I interacted the gender variable with my size 2, size 3, and as you can see, so these are these two. And then I took the same gender variable, and then I interacted with these three. These three, so those are these. And then I also have a bunch of other controls. So as you can see that I control for all these different things, age square, vector, so forth and so on. And then I told you that I have two different variables, log of hourly wage, and then also the PI refers to whether a particular respondent had a benefit provided by the employer. Okay, so let me show you a little bit about the overall sample here. The sample characteristics of selected variables from 9. So I use the data for all these repeated cross sections, 2000 to 2016. For those people who are familiar with NLSY, I don't have to tell you, but if you are not familiar, what happened is initially they used to have annual data, but what happened is like late 90s, I would say 96 onwards or so, they made it biannual. But anyway, so we went out and we looked at about 7 waves from 2000 to 2016. So this is the pool sample. So if you go back and if you see, this is your log wage, this is the mean, and this is the standard deviation. Now, when you go back and when you look at med, life insurance, maternity leave, or retire, these are all dummy variables, i.e. it's going to take a value of 1 if the employer provided that benefit. And then male is about, so my sample is almost 50-50. And then as far as the size is concerned, so this is where this is the smallest size firm, and then there's the second size and third size. So these are, which tells me that most of my workers come from smaller firms, like 56%, 24% here, and about close to 20% here. So when you look at the union membership, I think my overall sample indicates that I have about 18% union members. So then what I did is I went out and I disaggregated my sample by female. And then one other thing is I did not get a chance to paste one more thing. So what I did is from my sample, I went out and I disaggregated did I say female sample? I wanted to be sure that whether I'm stating it correctly. And yes. So this is what happened is if you go back, the same variables I showed you there, I went out and I tried to break it up by the firm size 1, firm size 2, and then firm size 3. Okay. So now let me go back. Now that the reason I'm showing you this one more time here is now you should be able to understand, like I'm going to go out and this is where I wanted to really define. So in the data, they gave us this classification. That is from 101 to 499 is going to be size 2. And then 500 or above is going to be my size 3. That anybody less than 100, 100 or less is going to be my size 1. So those are those size variables. And then this is, I told you that my M is the whether it belongs to male. And then I interacted those variables, and that's what I was trying to show you. So those are these interaction terms I have. Okay. So then what is the next thing I did? I wanted to show you 2 sets of results because I don't want to bore you with all because I ran a lot of regressions. So one result which I wanted to show you here is the GLS regression, which in terms of generalized least squares regression, I did for the log of wage. My total sample is about 38,410 from whatever the model I showed you. So we ran the regression. So now look what I'm trying to do. Since from my specification I showed you, I was able to, if I go out and if I evaluate my M is equal to 0, then this is going to give me, so my coding here is just, it may be a little, I need to highlight on this one. Whenever I say S refers to, that means it is the size effect. What is the size effect? Remember my control category is size 1. So this tells me that my size 2 is relative to that is about, as you can see, that's about in a log wage regression. I can get away with saying that it's about 7.3% higher wages. relative to my small size. And here you're going to get about 13% more. Not only that, but the difference between these two things is also was significant. But anyway, so I'm going to call that as S. S means that is the size effect. Then what is the threat effect? The threat effect argument here is anytime unions try to get into the workforce, then non-union employers will try to jack up their compensation, so forth and so on. If that story is correct, what would one expect? The union non-union gap is going to decrease as the firm size increases. So that's exactly what we found out, as you can see, in terms of the trajectory here. It's about 7.3%, 5.4%, and about 2.2%. So I'm going to call this as a T, or the union threat effect. So that's what I indicated as a T, as for the size effect. So then, if for some reason, if I'm comparing my coefficients across the board, if my female coefficient is bigger than male coefficient, because that is the, then I'm going to call that as F plus. But on the other hand, if my male coefficient is bigger than my female coefficient, I'm going to call that as M plus. Okay, just to make the coding a little bit easy. So what can we really say here? If I go back and if I look at this particular regression, this really shows that there is the size effect, and then there's also this evidence for the threat effect. And then further thing is, anytime you see pluses, that means that, as you can see, that the male coefficients are much larger, because that's the sum of those two, than compared to the female coefficients. So this is exactly what we did. Then the next thing is, even though we estimated regressions for different benefits, I wanted to show you for my medical insurance. So if you go back and if you look at the medical insurance here, so this is where I ran a random effect logistic regression. So when you go back and when you look at the same storyline here, so one thing which here I did not, even though we reported the coefficients, but I'm going to also report my marginal probabilities here. So if you go back and if you look at here, as you can see that the same storyline here, just coefficients wise, like S and S means that that these coefficients do increase as the size increases. Then when you go back and when we go back and when you look at it here, we do see that in terms of here, what happened is I think I should have been a little careful. There's a little bit of a drop in the U2 coefficient, but as you can see, this is about almost 2 compared to 1. And we were trying to investigate what happened to this one, but somehow this was a little misbehaving as far as what I expected. But whereas when I go back and when I look at the male coefficient, as you can see, again, we see that S, and then also I'm putting these pluses to indicate that the male coefficients are going to be higher. But in a logistic regression, we're going to be not just looking at only the coefficients. So we went out and we computed the marginal probabilities as like a simple way of computing the marginal probability. Then we evaluated them. So what exactly is that? It basically tells me that if you're a medical insurance, if you're looking at medical insurance, what we are trying to say is that there's about 4.4% higher probability that that the firms in size 2 is going to get medical insurance. Similarly, same story for your size 3. And then when you go back and when you look at the union thing is, this indicates that there's a 3.5% higher probability of you getting medical insurance if you're in firm size 1, and then almost about 2% in firm size 2, and then about 2.4% for the next one. So same story, which works even here. So in general, what exactly we are trying to show here? So this is why I showed you only for the medical insurance, but we also did, if you want me to show the results, I can also show you the results for, I don't know how I'm doing on time. How am I doing on time? 3 minutes? Oh, 2 minutes. Okay. Sorry. So if that is the case, but anyway, I can let me go to the next slide. So what exactly are my conclusions? Because here, as you can see from the analysis we presented, that both male and female workers in medium and large establishment receive not only higher wages, but also higher probability of participating in those benefit programs. And then these are the benefits we looked into. And then I showed you that there's a reinforcing size effect. That means firm size increases, union, the compensation increases, even you belonging to getting those benefits also increases. So then the large firms, in my view, at least pay higher wages to discourage workers to entrance unions. So that means this threat effect argument, I think we should definitely exploit in the sense, in terms of the policy making. if the large firms are able to go out and recruit more women workers, I mean, I don't know how they're going to do it, but I think that might play a little bit in terms of our labor, in terms of designing a equitable labor policy. So all in all, the research we are trying to present here is there's evidence of size effect, threat effect, and then unions also have a good role to play. All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. I hope I did not go overboard.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Fanny.
Okay.
Good
So let me
presentation.
stop sharing and hang on.
Yeah, and then Alex, if you're ready, I don't know if you have slides or not, but whatever you want to do.
Oh, he's going to have a lot of colorful slides, man. Come on. I
All
know
right.
him. I gave it away.
You're muted, Alex. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
So, yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to discuss this very interesting paper by Fanny about the evidence of a size effect and the union threat effects by gender on wages and benefits in the United States. I mean, let me tell you beforehand that I'm not an expert on the U.S. labor market, so please take this into account with my comments. Fanny, yeah. So
sorry to interrupt you. I became a German labor market expert reading your paper. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I have to admit, I really enjoyed reading your paper and following your presentation. I mean, summary of the paper, given that I have only 5 minutes, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But the thing which was for me important, and maybe also for the audience, is that this National Longitudinal Survey of Youth of the 1979 wave, which was started in 1979, but is a sample of Americans born between 1957 and 1964, I found out. So what Fanny was looking at, these are workers which were in the sample he is investigating. They were between 36 and 43 at the beginning, and 48 and 55. In the paper, I read 2012, but I saw the results were on 2016. So you have to add 4 more years. But so these are well-established workers in a sense. They are not starting with the work, but they are in the workforce for a while. So that's important to understand, and that's quite interesting as well. And Fanny already elaborated it on this very nice play with these interaction terms, which I liked a lot, which made the results very clear. But that's where we have to focus. But I mean, let me also not spend much time to the empirical results. Fanny can read that later, and she presented very well my comments. As I said, I found it very interesting. Fanny, I would like to, if I would have to suggest something, then I would also like you to think of a fixed effects model, simply to control the magnitude of your results, since they play a role. And we know that let's say the assumptions necessary for the random effects are simply more elaborate than the ones for the fixed effect. So that's simply a technical comment, not too far. And I would like also to see tests on whether the differences in the coefficients used for investigating the union threat effect argument are statistically significant, because that is what the employment size effect, that's what I also know well from Germany. Employment size is industrial relations, the most important variable, also in the German context. But this union threat effect argument I found very interesting. So please, at a later stage, it would be interesting to see some tests. And then I wanted to understand it better. Is it a general phenomena, or could there be something hidden? And along that line are my comments. So the question is, because you played already so nicely with these interactions, could you interact them with regional dummies? So for example, is it possible to investigate and control for differences between right to work states and non-right to work states? So could there be a sorting according to the states? Because, for example, I know the large German car companies, they like these right to work states quite a lot. So they like to be there. So could that play a role that would strengthen this union threat effect argument, if you could say, well, there is something behind it. And I also would be interested in general, another idea with respect to industry dummies would be to see whether there are differences between growing and in general shrinking industries. So let's say how much is related to goods producing industry and how much is to the service industry. I know the services is not now the very dominant sectors in the US. In Germany, industries play much bigger role nowadays, but it would be interesting to see the differences there with respect to unions. Of course, I mean, you know what is possible or not, whether it would be interesting to add older waves of the data and to see differences. And that was also maybe an additional hint. Is it possible to use more of the time dimension? So do we see changes related to changes in the political environment? So are there differences, for example, between the Bush years and the Obama years? Because I, as a foreigner, would expect that Obama was a bit more trade union friendly than Bush was, but I know the general political environment is more complicated. But it would be interesting to see that. And to let me conclude only for you at the end, there are small typos on page 9, which you will correct, but I mentioned them simply. I'm quite sure they had no influence on the results. It was only when you explained the results in percentage terms. And from an international perspective, given that I liked your paper already, a bit more information on the US system in the final version and some graphs, which I always like, would make it more understandable with people with less background than you have. So thanks a lot, for this very interesting paper and presentation.
Aaron, can I respond to? Is Aaron there?
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead, fine.
Okay, can I just respond to him?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay. So then we can see each other.
Yeah.
Okay. So as far as your comments are well taken, but when you say fixed effect, then you get into a lot of trouble, because what happens is anytime you have fixed effect, any of the time invariant variables can be included, and that you get into a major mess. Okay. Then as far as the time effects, we did control for, maybe I did not say it in the paper, but we did control for which, I mean, like a general control. So it wasn't like, maybe I did not state that one, I'm sorry, but I'm really glad you said. But in terms of Bush, we are getting is every 2 years or so. It's not like we have a lot of things to tease out. But given the fact that if you think that maybe one thing we could do is maybe have whether we have a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, so to see whether the things will pick up on that one. And then I think we did include for the regional dummies also. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, I think if I heard Alex's comments right, he was interested, especially in like basically the interaction terms. So not necessarily like the main effect of gender. So it's okay if like the fixed characteristics go away. Like it's more the interaction terms, and you can still have those with fixed effects. So you could still have like, is the union effect different among women than among men, or the union by firm size effect, even if you let it absorb gender. So you do lose that. You do lose like the gender main effect, but you still preserve the ability to look at whether effects of other things are different in the two groups. And I had the same reaction too.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Exactly, and that's also with. I'm perfectly happy about your controls. It's simply, if you want to go a step further, also with this right to work regions versus or states versus non-right to work. So whether you could also add additional interactions with your MU effects and your users, simply to see, let's say whether this influence or not, or whether it's more pronounced in these countries, in these states than in others. But that's only, as I said, from a general interest about the US.
So most of these right to work states are going to be Republican red states. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's a really cool idea to look at this in the NLSY, Fani. It's neat because and it is really great data for this because you do have,
oh, thank you.
Variation across people, but also like within people over time switching jobs. And you have, even with right to work, for instance, at least in recent years, there's been variation and even within state over time that maybe you could exploit.
Yeah.
So yeah,
All right.
that's great.
Thank you so much for all your comments.
Any other from the audience or anybody else have comments or discussion at questions at this point? Okay. Well, you're always welcome to pose them in the chat and we'll try to come back to them if time allows, if you get ideas inspired by interaction with the next papers. So we'll move on to Patrick Noose, is a fifth-year PhD student at Kiel University in the program on quantitative economics. He's a research associate at the in public economics at Kiel University as well, and previously, I guess, worked with Alex at the Macroeconomic Policy Institute, and he's presenting work on management opposition, strikes, and union threat. And then Jaime Lancaster will be discussing, she's an assistant professor of management at Humboldt State University School of Business, and her work focuses on policies and programs designed to raise wages for low-income workers. Saw her present some work the other day on minimum and sub-minimum wage policies. It was really interesting. So hopefully I'm sure we'll have a good discussion. Oh, and her friend there, who she'll have to introduce maybe. Okay. Patrick. I'm muted. You're muted, Patrick. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Beginner's mistake. Well, thank you for the introduction, Aaron. Yeah. As already mentioned, I'm a fifth-year PhD student at Kiel University, and the paper I present today is the first part of my dissertation, so feel free to give me as much comments as you like. Yeah, the paper is about management opposition, strikes, and union threat. Germany's industrial relations system has been eroding since the 90s, and we observe a strong decline in union density, a decline in collective agreement coverage, and also works council coverage and employers' organization participation. This erosion of the industrial relations system is not unique to Germany. It's happening almost everywhere on the world, and in Europe, Belgium is probably the only country which has no decline in union density in recent decades. The consequence of this erosion of the industrial relations system is increasing evidence for monopolistic competition, increasing inequality, and as a result, needed political intervention, which is, in the case of Germany, often an argument, which is why we prefer to focus on social partners, so unions and employers, to handle wage setting, and political interventions of any kind are the least favorite of politicians. So political interventions are a consequence of this erosion. Well, the questions and my empirical strategy, I have two main questions. The first one is Germany's industrial relations system eroding due to employers' management opposition. And the second one, how is this related to union strike activities? My empirical strategy is I am using a correspondence experiment where I sent about 13,000 fictitious job applications in Germany, where I revealed in some cases union memberships on various ways. This information I merged with additional data of the European Social Survey and regional employment data to look how these aspects affect employers' attitudes toward unions. And in the last step, I explored regional and sectoral variation in labor disputes. In a nutshell, I'm able to show that union membership in the CV decreases callbacks on average by 20%, and depending on firm characteristics, up to 50%. There we have quite a good fit to the previous presented papers, because I look also in such firm characteristics. Management opposition is stronger in large firms, and it's increasing with sector-specific union density. And the probably most interesting part, in my opinion, is that we can in fact observe an erosion of Germany's industrial relations system. But interestingly, this erosion mainly happens in sectors where management opposition is the lowest. So it looks like that the absence of union threat effects in specific sectors, so unions' weakness in the sectors, is the reason why employers leave collective agreements, and we have an increase in wage inequality. Related to labor disputes, this part is definitely only preliminary, but it looks like that strike activities indeed increase management opposition in terms of hiring discrimination, which is mainly happening in firms which are not covered by a collective agreement. So we definitely talk about spillover effect of a labor dispute in an organized firm on non-organized firms. Well, what do we know already about management opposition? Unfair treatment of union members has been a topic for a while, and probably no one would doubt that it exists. The question, however, is how representative it is for the entire economy. And as every method has its disadvantages, some or the previous research usually focused on survey data and data related to this. And yeah, it's relatively simple. When we ask employers whether they treat union members differently, they probably would lie simply because of kind of social desirability bias, or because treating union members differently can bring them into prison. And asking union members whether they have any kind of disadvantage or employers dislike them, it's quite difficult, because you wouldn't be a union member when you don't feel any kind of antagonism of capital and labor. When we look in the organizing literature, we might face a selection problem, because an unionization attempt in one specific firm might be related to aspects which also drive management opposition. And a last point is there is evidence that every kind of firm is acting against union members, but the opposition is varying with, or the kind of action varies. While larger firms often fire union members or act illegal, smaller firms who also act against union do more subtle and spread fear among employees. And when we look at one measure, it might be difficult to evaluate whether smaller firms are also covered by management opposition. Well, recently, Bert and Jaime were the first who used the correspondence experiment to analyze hiring discrimination against union members. And they've sent 560 fictitious job applications in the Belgian labor market and found hiring discrimination of about 20% against union members. And my study was motivated by them, especially because I was curious, since Belgium is the only country in Europe who has no decline in union membership observable. I was wondering whether effects in Germany might be quite different. Recently, we also have more evidence, or another correspondence experiment of hiring discrimination against union members for the United States, with about 1,000 fictitious job applications. And for the US, Kreisbeck and Wilmers find no evidence for hiring discrimination. But they're able to, with additional interviews, to show that the main reason is that employers do not fear unions at all, and they know that unions might not have effect on wage setting or cannot make any kind of trouble. Therefore, the absence of union threat effects in the US might be the main reason why there's no active discrimination in the hiring process. Yeah. Coming finally to my experiment, I sent pairs of fictitious job applications to real vacancies, and I monitored the callback rates of firms. I was sending these applications between August and October in 2017, 18, and 19, and sent in this main experiment about 8,700 fictitious job applications. I focused at the beginning on 4 regions and 4 occupations, and in the second year, I extended it to other regions and an additional occupation. The main reason of the extension was that I realized that the manufacturing industry was relatively low presented in my experiment, and I wanted to increase the set of related to this industry areas. Yeah, the main characteristics of the applicants, my applicants were all male and 28 years old only. They had a vocational trainee in the kind of occupation. They also applied for jobs later. And the 2 applications which I sent to each firm were comparable in all productivity relevant characteristics, and we are randomized in other aspects like the layout and so the pictures and so on to ensure that my union membership revelation is orthogonal to this aspects. Yeah. As the last part, at the end of the applications in the CVs, I included a kind of hobby and membership category. And between other hobbies or memberships, I bluntly included in this main experiment a union membership, which approximately looks like this. Here at the end, we have a kind of hobby membership section, and there I randomly assigned a union membership to one of the 2 applications for each firm. Yeah. So, and at the end, yeah, I looked at differences in callbacks to these firms. And yeah, now looking at my main results, I used 2 definitions of callbacks, which are usually used in the literature. The first category is category 1, which is a clear invitation to a job interview, which I got over emails or voicemails. So all applications were sent via email. And the second category includes all invitations from the first category, additional every kind of request the firms had. Usually, I know they also ended in a kind of clear invitation. It was just that that firms were imprecise in the reason why I have to call them back. It were often a voicemail message where they just told me they tried to contact me and they want me to call them back to talk about my application, which often is about further information or directly an appointment to a job interview. But on average, you can see, independent of callback category 1 or 2, I find clearly significant lower callbacks for union members of about 20%. Okay. When this was just the average effect I showed, and when I start kind of multivariate analysis and add a bunch of additional control variables and subsets like the separate waves, you can see that my overall finding on discrimination does not vary at all. So I have really robust evidence for hiring discrimination when revealing a union membership in the CV. Yeah, correspondence experiment happened for a while already, and there are a bunch of potential pitfalls we have when we conduct such experiments. One aspect is the Heckman critique, which argues that even when all productivity relevant characteristics are on average the same, when we have differences in the variance, this can bias my observed hiring discrimination in the correspondence experiment. I tested this. It was not a problem at all. The second point is my weighting might be not representative for the entire economy. Since I want to look on macro aspects later, this was relevant, but when I reweighted regarding employment, regional employment shares and GDP and such aspects, it didn't change the results that much. On average, it looks like my hiring discrimination even increases when I consider such things. Well, let's come to the elephant in the room. The first thing you might have in mind with my original design is no one should be so stupid to include the union membership in the CV. Therefore, the revealing a union membership might signal hiring discrimination against union members in this way might not reveal distaste against union members. It might more a signal for stupidity of the applicants, naivety, or someone who is already looking for conflicts with the employer even before he started working for him. And to solve this problem, I was in 2021, I conducted an additional experiment using 4,500 new fictitious job applications, where I revealed union memberships as I did in the first design. And secondly, I revealed union membership indirectly in their Twitter accounts. So these applicants sent their application to the firm and used a signature where also a link to their Twitter account was used. And in this Twitter account, both shared, retweeted regularly current political stuff around the elections related to COVID and everything. And one of them regularly retweeted something related to retweeted things related to German unions activities. So it was not clear that he is a union member. It was just that he signaled a kind of sympathy for Germany's unions. And my preliminary results on this, I still wait for some callbacks since I ended the experiment at the beginning of December. And as you can see, on average, we see that in the old design, union members have, in the CV revelation, discrimination is the strongest. However, I still find significant discrimination on the 5% significance level when people revealed union member via Twitter accounts. And there you have to keep in mind that revealing it over a Twitter account does not imply that every employer is aware of it, simply because not everyone might search in the social media accounts. But obviously, it was still enough to find hiring discrimination, also when I reveal union membership more subtle using Twitter accounts. Yeah, in the next step, I wanted to look on variation on hiring discrimination against union members related to sectors. The structure here is related to the NACE2 categorization. And you see strong variation in hiring discrimination against union members. Interestingly, the health sector, which is usually argued in Germany to has pretty bad working conditions, is a sector where employers do not fear unions at all. And you see in one case even favoritism of union members in the finance and insurance industry. Oh, I have a laboring error, I see, sorry. Well, there are two possible interpretations. So one is they probably simply have no idea what a union member is. And the other explanation is that what I'm doing here is simple multiple hypothesis testing. And therefore, by chance, I should find differences in the results. But yeah, the main point here is we see strong variation in hiring discrimination related to these industries. And I was wondering which aspects exactly can explain it. And my main conclusion based on this analysis was it's related to union threat effects. As we heard from the presentation before, union threat effects is the potential of unionization of a firm and the fear that when you are unionized, wages and working conditions increase for you, it gets much more expensive, and therefore firms might improve wages and working conditions to disencourage people to join a union. This is commonly approximated in analysis with variables like union density and firm size, as we saw in the previous presentation, and for the US right to work laws. But in Germany, we don't have, luckily, we don't have such variation. And yeah, the common reaction to union threat effects would be the improve of wages and working conditions, which are more close related to the one in organized firms. Well, let's look on the list on determinants I looked in. As already mentioned, firm size, which was already motivated in the talk before me. Then I looked into differences based on the contract type. We would, for example, expect that when it's just temporary employment, employer can get rid pretty easy of the applicant in a later stage when he already started working, and therefore with temporary employment or temporary contract, firms might be more relaxed to hire union members compared to the setting where it's a permanent contract. Then I looked into labor market tightness, and there I looked into occupation-specific vacancy unemployment ratios, so that I'm able to see whether in one specific occupation it's more difficult to find a suitable applicant, and therefore firms might be okay with unfavorable characteristics like a union membership, because the alternative might be to not fill the position at all. And the last variable is the sector-specific union density, so the average union numbers, the percentage share of union members in this industry, calculated based on the European Social Survey. Yeah, here I have a heterogeneity analysis based on these firm characteristics. The reference group is a firm size of 6 to 50 employees, which shows the previous average effect of 6% percentage points lower callbacks for union members. Compared to firms with smaller 6 employees, we see that this cancels out and we have no hiring discrimination in the small firms, but we see some kind of increase with larger firms. We don't see any effect of labor market or occupation-specific labor market tightness or the contract type. And we see that hiring discrimination against union members is bigger in sectors where a large number of employees is organized in the union. So we see what I would interpret as union threat effects. A last interesting variable is that I have firms with a collective agreement and without a collective agreement. And I can show that firms with a collective agreement discriminate less against union members, which fits the union threat idea because they are already organized and pay union wages. Therefore, they might be more relaxed with hiring an additional union member. The second last aspect I looked into are the labor dispute activities. And here I use regional and sectoral variation in labor disputes. So for every federal state in Germany, we have sector-specific information about the lost working days per 1,000 employees. And here, for an example, I use Bavaria and Berlin. And you can see how strong the strike activities in the sectors varied over the time. And in this next step, I try to exploit this regional and sectoral variation to look how hiring discrimination increased when there was a more intense labor dispute. And first, really preliminary results indicate that hiring discrimination is in fact increasing. And on average, hiring discrimination is on average, well, based on the average labor dispute intensity, hiring discrimination seems to increase by 30% compared to the previous average effect. So 30% of hiring discrimination against union members seems to be explained by labor dispute activity. And this is driven by firms who discriminate against union members, which are not related to collective agreements. So labor disputes happens happen in firms where the collective agreements are negotiated and not in the not covered firms. Therefore, it's obviously that labor dispute activities have spillover effects to non-unionized firms, which is in line with the idea of union threat effects. As a last point, to look in the question how this management opposition is related to the erosion of the industrial relations system. Here I have two figures where I correlate the sectoral share of collective agreements with my observed management opposition. So negative coefficients mean they are discriminated stronger. And we can see that the sectors who are discriminating the strongest are the firms who have the highest share of collective agreements, compared to firms who have low or no management opposition, who have the lowest share of collective agreements, which indicates that firms who have no union, or don't fear union members, also leave collective agreements, at least in the long run, on average. I also have additional analysis which looks at the change over time, and the pattern is approximately the same. The effect is just weaker. And I also look on firms who are not covered by collective agreements, and there we can separate them in two groups: firms who orientate on a collective agreement and who don't orientate on collective agreement. And you can see when firms are not scared by union members in terms of hiring discrimination, they do not, and they don't have a collective agreement. They also don't care about orientating on collective agreement wage setting, which is an indicator, which is in line with Kreisberg and Wilmers, that firms who don't fear unions leave collective agreements, decrease wages over time, and worsen working conditions, and vice versa. Strong management opposition is a sign for a healthy industrial relations system. So a system where employers fear unions and see them as a serious partner in bargaining about wages and working conditions. And yeah, that's it from my side. In conclusion, as already pointed out before, on average, I find hiring discrimination against union members. It's increasing with firm size and union density. And it looks like that management opposition is mainly observable where unions still have bargaining power and there exists threat potential. And it looks like that labor disputes have spillover effects on non-unionized firms. Thank you for your attention. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Patrick. That was really great research, great presentation. Thank you. Jaime?
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for sharing that. I thought it was a really interesting presentation, and it's out of my field. And so I had a lot of looking up of things to do. I learned a lot about the labor market in Germany and works unions versus union membership. A lot of things are quite different than what we experience in the US. And I thought it was really interesting. To sum up what you did, basically, union activity can have negative consequences to employers because they're expected or they need to pay more, both in terms of wages, but as also in terms of non-wage benefits. And so employers have an incentive, just as rational beings, to discriminate against union members during hiring, and especially in that first stage, where really it's probably going to feel to them like it might be one of their only chances to do it without repercussions. Or it might be subconscious. I don't want to read too much into exactly why. And you have a very ambitious, or what I think was a really ambitious research design, 13,000 fictitious job applications, first over 3 years between 2017 and 2019. And then it seems like you had this idea, wait, I really should be including social media. So you did it again in 2021. And I think that was just the time that went into that. It seems, very impressive. And so you did virtually identical experiences, virtually identical applications to each employer, where they differed fundamentally based on union membership. Or, when you followed up, you said, okay, I'm not going to say that we're in a union, but we're just going to show pro-union sentiment, which is a little bit more subtle, but you still got the effect. So it was robust to even showing interest in unions on Twitter. And so you found substantial discrimination in hiring against union members, and that it's stronger in larger firms and in sectors with higher union density, just kind of saying that it's the discrimination is larger where employers have more to lose. And that makes a lot of sense. But that firms with existing collective bargaining agreements are less adverse to hiring union members because, they're basically already unionized. So there's this mix of really intuitive findings that you're able to show quite robustly. And then some unintuitive things, like I thought that the temporary contracts, that for a temporary job, employers would not care as much, but it's the same, whatever their process is, it applies for temporary or non-temporary. And so I thought that was quite interesting. So some of the contributions or strengths, it's ambitious, but also clear. And I found it really intuitive. As somebody new to this field, it made a lot of sense what you were doing and why. You looked at many possible causes, and you had a lot of robustness checks. It was the first extension of this into the German labor market. You had this multi-year analysis that allowed you to look to see if there was differences over time. You pivoted in 2021, and I thought it was really interesting. My sources of confusion or comments might have to do with my place as an out of area person. Somebody who's more familiar to this might not have these places of confusion, so take them with a little bit of grain of salt. When I was going through the paper, there were a few places where I didn't understand what was going on. I would have liked a little more clarity. Like in table 2, which you didn't show in the presentation, I was trying to figure out why doesn't column 2 equal 3 + 4 + 5? And so I was trying to make sense of your net discrimination or some of your measures, and I couldn't really get there because I was missing a step in my mind. And then in table 6, in the paper, it says that smaller employers don't show evidence of discrimination. But when I was looking at the main effect and then combining that with the interaction, I thought that there was still an effect there. There's some, but it was less. I don't know if that's true. And then I didn't get the relationship between the presence of labor disputes and increased management opposition. They seemed like small, but weekly significant. But then your discussion today, I guess I would have liked a little more explanation of how to interpret those coefficients, or possibly in the paper, going through your specifications with a specific definition of each variable. I think that might have helped me a lot. And then in the earlier tables, when you talked about strike intensity, I think you go up to 2009, but then you've got this 2021 data, and I would have liked to have seen how strike intensity changed in 2021, just as context. But also, one of the things I was curious about was the labor market in 2021, at least in the United States, possibly in Germany too, because of the pandemic, the labor market has changed a lot, and maybe a little explicit conversation about the pandemic and changes to the labor market, that would have been nice. And if you do more of these, add women and older workers, because we saw with Fani's conversation that there is a difference with regards to gender, and I think that could fill it out. Although you might be ready to leave these resumes and Twitter accounts behind. And I would understand that too. Yes. All right. I think I've got one more slide. I thought it was interesting and thought-provoking. And I just saw a lot of well-planned, ongoing, thorough work. And I thought it was really nicely done.
Thank you, Jaime. Yeah, Patrick, do you want to respond at all?
Yeah, I would like to thank you for your comments, especially regarding the explanations of the tables, which I still have to work on. I'm definitely too inexperienced for it, but I work on it. And yeah, regarding two aspects. I agree with the presentation I saw for my presentation definitely is a good argument why we would expect differences regarding gender and older employees. And it looks like I definitely have to cite the paper of Phanindra. And yeah, regarding the labor market situation, that's a good point. I considered these aspects, and here's a graph related to labor market conditions in these different federal states. And indeed, we can see that the situation is quite different. Originally, I wanted to do the social media experiment in 2020, but because the labor market situation was so dramatically different, I waited until the conditions improved and started this experiment in 2021. It might be a good idea to send additional, or to have sent 5,006 additional fictive job applications in 2020 to look how labor market conditions or a recession affect hiring discrimination. And I guess would I have done this? It's the second paper of my dissertation, and it would show that discrimination almost varies and vanishes entirely. And yeah, maybe I'm able to present this next year at the ASA meeting. And yeah, I definitely have to control one or two more aspects regarding the labor market conditions in the second experiment, but that's a definitely good point. I have one or two things in mind now. Thank you.
Any other
Aaron,
questions from the floor?
Can I ask you a question? Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, Patrick, your research. So I think the discussant already made my point. I thought that maybe the gender angle should be looked into just to see how it's going to play out. But anyway, the question I have is, when from the results I saw in your table 6, if I remember correctly, I'm not a big fan of linear probability model, because I like to always to see, okay, linear probability is easy to read. But if I were you, I would highly recommend it, because the thing is, some of the predicted probabilities, I don't know whether they're going to be bounded between 0 and 1. So what, I mean, if they did, more power to you. But what I would highly recommend you to do is, at least in an appendix, have a bivariate, logit or probit, whatever maybe your preference. And the question I have is, when I was looking, I was a little confused with your results in your table 4. If I understand correctly, the table 4 results are where you got all the information through the social media. Is that right? That's where the Twitter or whatever came into play. So for the earlier rounds, I mean, for the earlier waves you used from 2017 to 2019. So did you use some kind of what kind of a survey instrument did you use? Like, how did you? What I'm saying is, what was the mechanism by which did you use some kind of a survey monkey? Or how did you are able to communicate or get the data?
Okay. I also did it with probit estimates, and the results are robust, and the significance even increased slightly. It was mainly to the interpretation, which I liked more in this way regarding labor disputes. But I probably should change it to probit. That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm saying is just to be on the safe side, just because what happens is, I mean, LPM is great. Don't get me wrong. But given the fact that so then when I'm looking at one more question I had is, when I saw the last part, what is the difference between covered and follow a collective agreement? I mean, maybe did I miss something in what you said?
It's the Institute for Employment Research at the IRB.
Are you asking Fani, like, how did he implement the social media?
No, not the social media. I mean, when you said about covered and a collective agreement, I mean, I thought that when you look at one of his last slides, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
you mentioned
the correlation between management opposition and the share of collective agreements. The Institute of Employment Research in Germany has firm data where they provide information about firms who have a collective agreement and firms who have no collective agreement in their database. And it's a survey instrument. The firms are asked when they have no collective agreement, whether they orientate on it. It doesn't mean they pay union wages. It just means they orientate on part of it, like maybe it's only holiday days or vacation, maybe it's wages, maybe it's additional benefits or something, but it's no 100% fit. It just means they try to orientate on union wages, which you can interpret as when union wages increases, they might also adjust to hold some kind of difference. But at least these firms consider union collective agreements in their wage settings compared to firms who say, we don't care at all about collective agreements.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'll just throw out one reaction. If you're worried about the resume signal carrying not just information about union status, but also about other aspects of people, like their intelligence or their naivete or something. One way to do it is what you did. Another way to do it would be to try to signal those things directly on the resume. So, you know, I don't know quite how to do that in an unobtrusive way, but if you then like anchor people with a specific signal of those characteristics, you know, that's a different way to tackle the problem. I see Fabienne asked a question in the chat. Patrick, I don't know if you could take a couple of minutes and respond to that. You're muted though.
Yeah, sorry, again. Voting shares for left and right-wing parties in regions and union discrimination. I have no idea because I didn't thought about it, but I will consider it when I look at my data again. Thank you. Yeah, that might be a probable channel. Yeah, it might become difficult because strongly unionized industries are partly in regions where we have mainly conservative parties forced, but yeah, I will check it. Thank you.
Fabienne, any follow-up, or is that good?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any last comments here, or we'll move forward? Again, we can always circle back at the end too.
Well,
okay.
I had the other part of the question. Basically, it's two questions in one. So I was wondering whether there was a way to check clicks on these Twitter accounts to see whether the treatment was actually successfully implemented.
I indeed have. I tracked it with Rebrandly, also I individualized the links, but I have not looked in the analysis yet, simply because on average the effects are fine, and it was more a safety net in case I find no discrimination against union members. But at least it's on my to-do list to check for the link clicks. However, I realized that preliminary analysis I already did with it, and it looks like the number of firms who click on the links are fewer than the number of firms who didn't click on the links, but the not clickers still discriminated against union members. There's a chance that because of firm policies, they are not allowed to click on any kind of links, and they just used the individualized link, the individualized Twitter handles, and looked directly in Twitter. So, but I still will look on the channel of link clickers compared to non-link clickers. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, because you could have forgotten about it in a way, and just showing the share on how many firms or how many CVs you sent out and how many firms clicked on the link might show that the treatment in a way worked, and then how big the effect size we could expect from this treatment. So yeah, great, thank you. I'm looking forward to an update of this work.
It seems like you could also look at directly on the Twitter accounts and see like how many views they got rather than going through the link. And that might also be maybe have some information, I don't know. But okay, let's move ahead. Thank you, Fabian. Those are great questions. So next we'll have Lucombo Luveia. Oh, yes. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong.
No, it's correct.
Great, thank you. Lucombo, he's a PhD student at Howard University's Economics Department, an applied macroeconomist with a focus on growth, development in the labor market. A lot of his research focuses on the effect of external shocks on employment, wages, productivity growth, and particularly employer monopoly power in the US. And he'll be presenting work on examining the effect of employer concentration on Chinese trade shocks. He also does work with the Groundwork Collaborative, I understand. And discussing the paper, offering some comments will be Zhang, who's a postdoc associate at Cornell University's Department of Global Development. Her research links planning, built environment, services, and public health to explore community development strategies, and is interested in the impact of locational attributes on people's activities, their decisions to move or stay, to commute or migrate. And take it away, Lucombo. We'll try to have until about 10:50 my time.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a second, let me, okay, because I cannot find the Zoom link. Just a second. Okay. Just a second.
No problem.
Okay. Yes.
It's kind of zoomed in funny. Maybe you could do full
Okay.
screen.
Okay. Okay. Just struggling a little bit with the Zoom.
Yeah, it's hard when there's so many different windows to choose from. I don't know if anybody watched David Card's presidential address, but you know, he's a Nobel laureate now, and he had a hard time getting his slides set up. So,
okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I'm going to present to examine the causal relationship between the Chinese trade shock and employer concentration. So this research assessed the relationship between the Chinese trade shock, which is the swift rise of import penetration from China to the US, and the employer concentration, which is the market power by the firm to control the employees. So this paper, just to highlight, is use Acemoglu et al. 2014 framework, empirical framework. Mostly the framework and the data on Chinese import penetration. So it used also commuting zone level data, which were extracted from QWI, which I will explain right later. To analyze for the relationship, the causal relationship, I used the Granger causality test, which for employee concentration on Chinese trade shock did not find is to cause did find that the employee concentration does not cause Chinese trade shock. However, the regression result on Chinese trade shock regressing the Chinese trade shock on employee concentration Chinese trade shock does provide the robust result, which we'll also discuss later on. As for that specifically result on Chinese employee concentration on Chinese trade shock, it find very statistically significant result on general, but also on those industries that are more exposed to trade, and we'll go on that. However, when we look at the commuting zone employee concentration, no exposed tradable industry, the impact is negative, which I will also explain later. So I will begin to say that to my best knowledge, this is the first paper that does such analysis of Chinese trade shock and employee concentration. As I will explain later on, there are many papers that study different aspects of Chinese trade shock, what has been of many research interests lately. Also, there are many papers that look at different aspects of employee concentration and mostly on wage. But to study the relationship between these two, I have not found, and I believe this to be really the first one, which is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, which I will explain later on as well. So the question is, why is it important to analyze the Chinese trade shock and employee concentration? One important thing to highlight is that as we have been, many researchers have been trying to find out why the wage, even though we see the productivity in the US growing very fast, but the real wage has not been growing in the same as the productivity. So if people are producing more, we at least expect that the real wage also is also to increase in the at least as close as possible. But this is not what we see. What we see, that they look at nominal wage, yes, but when we look at the real wage, this doesn't happen. So there are many explanations, of course, of why this is happening. So this paper does bring the contribution explaining part of why this is happening. Again, when we look also the labor share of national income in the US is also diminishing, as Benelez and his group stated in the paper in 2000. So I will begin by explaining the employee concentration using this NBER chart. We see that employee concentration has been high in the US since at least 1977. Using HHI, which is one of the widely used measurement of employee concentration, we see that which vary from 0 to 1. 0 is, we could say that the labor market is very competitive. So it means that no single company control a labor market, or it can go to 1 if we have a kind of monopoly or just one firm controlling the labor market. We can also use 1 to 10,000 if you multiply the HHI by 10,000, the index by 10,000. So here we were using 1 to 0 to 1, and we can see that the labor market has been moderated concentrated, because more than moderated concentrated, because we see that from 1977 to 1981 is close to 0.69. And then we see that it has been increasing steadily, and it reached close to 0.75, from 2002 to 2009. If we also use this chart from NBER, we see also that which analyze in terms of commuting zone, not in terms of time, but in terms of commuting zone in 2016, we see that the labor market has been concentrated, but differently. We see that most of the commuting zone in the center, US center, have been heavily concentrated. But as we move a little bit to some more density area like New York and maybe Los Angeles, we see that it is less concentrated. So low concentrated is the lightest one, which is 0 to 15. And the dark blue is the most concentrated area, which is above 0.5. And we can find this very concentrated labor market, which more in some specific area. So if we look at on the Chinese trade shock perspective, just to give the Chinese trade shock perspective, I'm using Acemoglu 2014 paper. We see, and just to justify why, I will explain later why we're using 1991, 1999, 2007, and 2011 for our analysis, only these 4 years. We see that really the Chinese trade shock start around 1990. All the graph will show that. We see in this graph, the Chinese share of world manufacturing value added and the China share of world manufacturing export increasing. So, and we can see that it has begun increasing very strongly from 1990, and it has been very rapidly, and as recently as 2010, we can see that has more than doubled. If we analyze the net export of manufacturing and the net export of food, fuel, and other metals. And we see next export in terms of import and export. We see that the China has been importing more and more fuel and other metal, which is needed for its industry to grow and its economy to grow. It means that it needs more than it has. But on the other hand, we say that the next export of manufacturing, which is our main, which is in the center of our analysis, has been growing, which on the other hand is saying that the China export of manufacturing has been increasing very rapidly, as the graph shows, and also more closely from 1919. This next graph shows the China reveal comparative advantage in manufacturing and in the rest of the fuel and other metal that I just stated. We can see that the Chinese position has been growing. We can see the blue line has been growing very fast, also borrowing this figure from Acemoglu paper. However, when we look at its position in terms of fuel and other metal, it's been decreasing, of course. As I just stated, the country needs more and more to get this material so that it can run its manufacturing or its industry. So this next graph also gives us a very good aspect in terms of really in terms of within the industries, what really has been growing the most in China. We can see like the green light, the green, which is textile and panel and other leather. And we can see that those more manufacturing products are those that have been growing the more. But when we look at the other things like machinery and electrical, it has been growing in different space. So this chart here show both country, China and the US current account balances. Again, if we look at which period the current count balances have shifted. We see that this happened around 1991. We see that the U.S. current account balance has become has started becoming negative, which U.S. is the blue. But when we look at the Chinese, which is red, we see that its current account balances has been growing. I mean, has turned from negative to positive and has been growing steadily. So this last chart showed the U.S. import from China and U.S. export to China, which is important because we use this to calculate our China shock, which is our expository variable, or it can be our dependent variable depending on how I will explain it. So we see all here that the U.S. import from China, again, is this one here has been growing very fast, very, very fast, since also 1991. But when we look at the U.S. export to China, even though it has been growing, but in a very low rate, which is here at the bottom. So when we calculate then our Chinese import penetration ratio, which is the U.S. manufactured import from China by U.S., which is import divided by domestic U.S. domestic production plus export minus import, we see that it has been also increasing very rapidly, which is the line that we see here at the top. So again, this justifies first the period that we will be using, just like Acemoglu, 1991, 1999, or 1995, 2007, 1999, 2007, around. 1999, I justify because it's the period that we believe that this Chinese import shock penetration has started, more or less. 2007 and 2011 is important because we know that 2007 is the period of great the recession, and we need to look also after the period of great recession. That's why we also use 2011. So just for background, for robustness of our results. So some few facts, since I have a little bit more time. Why this is being now conducted, because lately we see that there is more data, specifically on employer, but also many researchers that have been looking at the specifically on employer concentration are really questioning if U.S. labor market is perfectly competitive, in the sense that if U.S. labor market were competitive, the marginal productivity and the salary dividing should be 1. But it's some research found that it's not really 1, because usually marginal productivity is higher. The value of marginal productivity, is higher than the salary, which means that the employer most likely are paying the employees less than what they really produce. So the salary, the wage are lower than the value of marginal productivity. The rest of my presentation, I will present the literature review. Then I will present data, summary, statistics, and how the empirical methodology that were used. I will provide the regression result, including the Grange causality test. And then if I have time, I will interpret those results and then give some reference on what I'm going to do next. So in terms of literature review, I would like to begin by saying that depending on its nature, trade may affect the labor market in different ways. We think on trade in terms of shock here, can be a positive shock or negative shock. In this specific case, it depends on how we look it. Like Tempesti in his paper 2020 provide the evidence of several channels through which trade may change the share of benefit, in the sense that we have the compensation, within the compensation we have wage, and we have the benefits. So trade can share the whole compensation, it can share only the share of benefit, or can change the wage as I just stated, or it can even change the ratio. So as for trade, specifically trade with China, which is in the heart of our job, the growth of trade between the US and China since 1919 has been the subject of many research. I mean, I'm not the first one to study this specific subject, but however, most of the research that I've seen so far have been estimating the benefit and cost of trade integration, and more specifically, the impact on wage and employment. Like, again, the Tempest in 2020, he believed that the increase in US import as fraction of GDP is mainly due to the increase in US import from developing country, but mostly from China, which we already saw. So, trade with China or China trade shock, again, can have a different impact, which costs, in terms of cost, can be a distributional impact and adjustment cost. Overall, just to be short, overall, most of the research on Chinese trade shock have found a negative effect on wage and employment. As for employee concentration, I would like to cite Lake and Millman, 2005, which was cited by Tempest also in 2020, which found that Chinese import penetration destroy bad jobs, but also create good jobs. Another paper by Bemlek in 2009, very recently, which used county level sensor data to study the impact of employee, the impact of employee penetration on wage in local labor market. Another paper by Gregor and its pair did, which is employee concentration outside option, did study the effect of employee concentration on job in the US as well. So Ershbein and his pair did quantify whether the US labor market is characterized by employer market power, and whether the degree of employer market power, which is employee concentration, has increased over time. And we saw that, yes, it has increased over time. So I could cite all this paper, but most of them, as I said, they study on employee concentration. They look at the employee concentration on its effect on wage, and on Chinese trade shock. I already highlight that is mostly concentrated on wage and employment. So data and the summary statistics and our methodology. So we use two main sources of data. For employee concentration, we use QWI, QWI, which is quarterly workforce indicator from Labor Department. Is a data set that provides employment data by zip code and various types of firm. For this specific study, we extract data in terms of firms, private firms, of course, private firms. On county level, we use 2-digit North NIS sector level, and we use all state, including Washington, DC. So the total number of observation was huge, by 100,000 of data of observation. But after collapsing them to merge them with Acemoglu data set, it's come down to 565 observation, which I will explain later on. It's important to say that we analyze both in terms of overall effect, but we also analyze effect when we interact them with what we call classes. So what are class? We divide by effect on sectors that are directly exposed to trade with China, and those sectors that are not directly exposed with China. Those sectors that are not directly exposed with China can be sectors that do trade, but there are also sectors that do not trade. We can say sector that do not trade, like a barber shop doesn't make any, doesn't trade. So those are the class that will be utilized. So there are three different class: directly exposed, then the second not directly exposed but tradable, and then not those class, those sectors that are not directly exposed and also are not tradable. So there are three different class. As for HHI, which is our measurement of employee concentration, I would like to highlight that there are more measurement, yes. So this is the way it is calculated. I will not, I have already said how is it calculated. I will also already said about data, so I will not spend too much about the data. So this is our summary statistics. So our summary, this data is before I collapse it with Acemoglu data set. I want to show this before I collapse it. So employee total is our dependent variable. Our dependent variable, if we look at the employee concentration, regressive employee concentration Chinese trade shock. And this is for Chinese trade shock. So methodology, this is the overall equation. The dependent variable, let's say here is our employee concentration. We are regressing with our import penetration from China, and we have some control variable, which are mostly demi-variable, regional demi-variable, manufacturing share, baseline, and many other that I will explain later. And here, this is the methodology we use when we interact our explanatory variable with sector and other control variable that I will just explain. So the country causality test which is for this specifically for employee concentration causing China import penetration, which is our null hypothesis. We had a p-value of 0.42, almost 2.43, which means that we cannot reject that hypothesis. So that said, I will focus on presenting only the results that are important, which is Chinese trade shock causing employee concentration. So this is our regression result, which I barely can see. I know that I'm running out of time. I would like to explain a little bit, but I hope I will have some time to explain. So when we look at the overall result.
Lucombo, yeah, just maybe take like 2 more minutes if you could.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So when we look at overall exposure, we see, which is our first column, we see that, yes, Chinese trade shock does affect negatively employee concentration. But when we look at the sectors, we have different results, which is the middle column. We have a different result. We can see that as affected positively, the results are statistically significant. When we look at the directly exposed sector, we saw that it's statistically significant, negative. But when we look at the no exposed tradable sector, we see that the effect is statistically significant, but is positive. And when we look at no directly exposed and the non tradable sector, we see that is in some cases statistically significant as well. So I would like to say that this result depend on whether we include more of the control variable, the demi variable, the interaction we have at the bottom. So I would like to stop here and then explain as the question comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Lucombo. So that was it's a really interesting question, and I can see you're making a ton of progress on it. So thank you for sharing that. And do you have? So we're going to have a few minutes here for. Again, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Zhang, to give reaction.
Yeah, that's very close. Yeah, my name is very hard to pronounce. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's a very interesting paper to link the Chinese trade stock with the employment concentration. And the main finding is that employment concentration does not cause the Chinese trade stock. But on the other hand, the Chinese trade stock can lead to less employment concentration. I have several questions for this paper. The first one is, as the presenter shows map the different at county level, the employment concentration in the US. So I was wondering if you consider some spatial control, because you can see in most regions is more employment concentrated in other regions. And the other question is, as the study focused on the Chinese import penetration. So as we know that China joined the WTO in 2001. So I was wondering if there are like time control at that time spot, consider the before and after 2001 to see if there any difference. And my another question is,
please, can you, the first question, please. The first question, yes. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, my first question is about if you consider any spatial control in the US. And my second question is, if you think about the year, the 2001, when the China joined the WTO, if that will make a difference. And my third question is, as I was wondering, when you consider the employment concentration, did you consider different sector? Because you consider the exposure and non-exposure tradable goods. So if we think about the change of economic structure in the US and change from manufacturing to services. So when you consider the employment concentration, I was wondering if you think about like manufacturing and the service sector differently to see if that will make a difference for the result.
Okay.
Thanks, Ray.
So should I respond?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't get the first question, but let me jump to the second question. So the first question, time control, yes. I use this similar framework, as I said, from Asimoglu. Yes, this calculus control for time control. But yes, there is a time control. There is a time demi variable. There is a time demi. for this. 2010, when the Chinese joined to yes, definitely the time the dummy which is there at the table. There is a 10-time dummy that is even interacting with other dummy is used as a control to make sure that that doesn't bias our estimate. As for the manufacturing, there are different manufacturing here that were used, and there is also a dummy. There is also a control variable that use manufacturing share at the baseline, considering 1991. So yes, that is completely within the framework, the methodology. Yeah, it's already there. I didn't get the first question.
I think she was asking if you were like controlling for the fact that some commuting zones were neighbors and other commuting zones are not neighbors. So sort of allowing for spillovers across commuting zones. But I think the answer, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just that basically no, you're assuming that each commuting zone is independent of the others, but defining, like commuting zones are defined in such a way that they're meant to be like capture labor markets that are, you know, people inside the labor market are competing with each other. Correct. And people out across the commuting zones are not. I mean, it's not a perfect thing, but that's how they're designed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also maybe also to highlight that. Yes.
I was just going to say to Joy, I think if I understood correctly, your strategy of like the basic design that you're using is exploiting the fact that, you know, WTO entry changed import penetration. So he is, I think, leveraging that variation. Exactly. I think that's the big driver of the
yes,
of the treatment.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, we only have a minute or two left, but if anyone else has a question, thank you, Shui. Those were great questions. And, you know, I think hopefully there are spatial models you could estimate. And I don't know that they would change the results much, but, you know,
yes,
there are such things.
Yes, yes. I'll be very happy to receive those contributions as well.
There's like XT, SPM and state, I think. XT, SP, I think. Spatial panel models. Okay, well, I think we're out of time, and I want to thank all the participants and the attendees for your engagement. And thanks everybody. Have a great day. Happy New Year. And
thank you.
Hope to see
could you
all
ask him not to share the screen? Aaron, could you ask him not to stop sharing the screen?